Today we're going to talk about Dandelion, Taraxacum officinale, that weed that grows over most of the U.S. We'll talk about its historical uses to support the liver, among other things. I am Maggie O'Halloran, and we are in my backyard here in Central Florida, where we don't have dandelion growing, but I'd love to talk about this plant because it's such a healthful, nutritious part of my apothecary at home here. So let's start by looking at the picture of the leaves. Dandelion, or Taraxacum officinale, has been around for a long time, as you can tell by that officinale. Is a designation for plants that were among the Greek apothecary. So it's been used for thousands of years. It's a member of the Asteraceae family. And the name dandelion, we think, comes from the French dent de lion, or tooth of the lion. And you can see the teeth of those dandelion leaves here. And for those of you who have it growing near you, Gainesville, Florida and north, you are very familiar with those. And we are all probably familiar with those wonderful puff seed balls that I grew up making wishes on in Louisiana. But here in Central Florida, it can be cultivated occasionally, but we don't really have it growing wild. It is considered a weed growing north of Gainesville and all over the Americas in more temperate environments. Australia, New Zealand, and any temperate regions of Austria, Italy, Poland, Turkey. And in India, it's cultivated for a lot of different liver issues. If we can check out the flowers here in Rosemary Gladstar's book, Medicinal Herbs. Dandelion, all parts are edible. And we'll talk more about the medicinal qualities or historical medicinal qualities. But starting with these beautiful flowers, which are edible, and if you saute them with a little bit of butter, they're said to taste a little bit like mushrooms. So the flowers are edible, and when we're moving through and thinking about growing it, if you live in a place that is more temperate than Central Florida, you can direct sow those seeds in the fall and then have the wonderful greens that we'll talk about. The first of spring, as soon as the snow starts to melt, you'll get those wonderful dandelion greens popping up for you. Dandelions like pretty much any kind of soil as long as they have sunshine. As many of you know, if you let your grass go without being mowed for a little while, you often get dandelions popping up. So if you're trying to cultivate it, if you feel like you don't have access to it on your own, you can sow those seeds in the fall, and then they would pop up in the spring. You can also grow it just because the pollinators really love it. And tell me, are you growing it? Do you have it going wild in your yard? Is this a plant that's really been calling your name that you've been using for a while? Comment below with your story of where you are and how you're using it these days. So, like I said, the entire plant is edible and medicinal. Next, we'll talk about the roots. And in Rosemary Gladstar's book, there's another really good picture of those roots. And when they are nice and young, maybe they've been growing for just the one season, you can see the roots grow long tap roots. This plant is very grounding for eating it, and it stays pretty close to the ground. But the long tap root can be wonderful, chopped up, and is edible. It's also considered a liver cleanser. So if you're incorporating that dandelion root into your life, it can be really nice, mild laxative. It's not very strong. A lot of us could be supported by having a little bit of the greens in your life, but this mild laxative quality can make dandelion root helpful or beneficial for chronic constipation. It's often used as part of an acne protocol and can be helpful in some fertility issues if the fertility issues are brought about by stagnation in the gut region. So that's the root. It also has a bitter flavor, and as you know, the bitter flavor can be a really nice way to stimulate digestion. The body is triggered to produce bile, and that bile helps with digestion and breakdown of especially cholesterols and fats. The leaf also has that nice bitter flavor, and remember those toothed, the lion's tooth leaves. Is there a question?
Someone said mine has smooth leaves.
So smooth, shiny leaves, sometimes you have, if they're growing in more direct sun and a harsher environment, sometimes the leaves are a little bit smaller and can be a little more brittle. But as you can see, they're kind of shiny, smooth leaves, and sometimes they're a little bit more fuzzy than others, depending on the growing environment. So those leaves also have the wonderful bitter flavor. If you have them growing around you, you can nibble on them for that nice bitter digestion support. They've been historically or traditionally used for both the leaves and the roots have a lot of traditional uses for the urinary tract system and digestive, but really it's the liver support and the cleansing aspects of dandelion that have been utilized in terms of medicine for a long time. Remember, this video isn't designed to diagnose or treat anything. Make sure if you're bringing new plants into your life or new protocols into your life that you're working with your medical care providers on that. But these leaves are what we're going to really focus on today, with that bitter flavor and mild diuretic qualities. But unlike your pharmaceutical diuretics, they can be a really good source of potassium and iron and calcium, B complex, vitamin A, K, vitamin C, and a few other trace minerals. The leaves are just packed with nutrition. If you have the advantage of growing them near you, I would use them as food as often as you can because they're really nutrient dense. If you're looking for a recipe, those leaves can be chopped up and steamed and drizzled with olive oil or sauteed and pretty much cooked in the same way you would cook kale or any other green that really is tougher, like collard greens maybe. You can incorporate those dandelion greens into any recipes you're already working with that are using those dark leafy greens. So the uses, in Central Florida, I'm often incorporating them into my life in a dried format, or I find alternatives if I'm trying to add them to my sautés and soups and stews and things like that. In Central Florida, we have several plants that look very similar. If you're interested in getting a really good solid ID or want to look at other plants that grow that are really similar to those dandelions, check out eattheweeds.com. That's our local green dean, and he has a really nice write-up on several of the plants that we have growing here in Central Florida and South Florida and North Florida, but the more tropical plants that look a lot like those dandelions. I have one of them here. If you want to compare it a little bit with my picture of the dandelion, we have a plant that unfortunately is known as a common name as false dandelion, and I feel like I struggle with giving plants that kind of identity of false some other plant name, but you can see why it's often misidentified as a dandelion because those leaves look very, very similar to those teeth of a lion or the dandelion leaves. One way that you can tell the difference is the flower is much smaller. The dandelion flower is going to be about the size of a quarter. And this flower, although it's all closed because it's the afternoon, this flower is much smaller. You can see it's like a quarter the size of that dandelion flower. And the puffballs on the Central Florida hawksbeard or false hawksbeard or dandelion is going to be a lot smaller as well. These leaves are edible. They have that same bitter quality. I occasionally leave them to grow in my yard just to have them access to that bitter flavor. But when we're talking about the traditional uses of dandelion, this plant would not be among some of the aspects of dandelion. Just wanted to point out one of our local false dandelion plants. I've also seen bundles of greens at farmers markets nearby in Central and South Florida. And there's another plant that the leaves look really similar, but they get a lot bigger. And that plant is chicory, commonly known as chicory. And the way that you can tell the difference there is that the chicory plant, the flowers are more like blue-purple, and compared with that yellow of the dandelion. They are often seen as interchangeable because those leaves can be highly nutritious, like I mentioned before, with all those vitamins and minerals and good things for the body. So if you're accessing chicory and you thought it was dandelion all that long, you're still getting those wonderful vitamins in your body. Today I have broccoli greens because a lot of us eat those broccoli florets, but the broccoli greens are also really nutrient dense, and I prepare them in a really similar way that I would the dandelion greens. So I thought I'd show you how I use my broccoli greens that are a little easier to grow here in Central Florida because those broccoli flowerets take a little longer to grow and have access to, so the leaves can be really nice. So I would just chop them up like any other greens, and I can saute them with olive oil and garlic, or I can also preserve them, or I can make apple cider vinegar, which if you're making tinctures, apple cider vinegar is one liquid that you can use for that. And apple cider vinegar is a wonderful way to capture and hold on to all of those vitamins and minerals in dandelion, especially for people in your life that maybe aren't as into eating those dark leafy greens. So all I would do is chop it up and then fill my jar about 2/3 of the way. It's a little bit more than that, that's okay. Fresh greens in my jar, filling it with apple cider vinegar, and unlike most tinctures, I'm going to put this in the fridge. Because I'm in Florida, mostly, because these leaves, even though they're clean, and with apple cider vinegar, they're prone to have mold or fungus or things on them like that. Here in Central Florida, we have so many things in the air. If you live in a drier climate, you may be able to put that apple cider vinegar in with the fresh greens and let it sit out for 4 to 6 weeks and then strain it like a regular tincture. But for me here, I'll cover this with apple cider vinegar. I'll fill my jar. I'll put the lid on. I'll store it in the fridge. Now, for the next few weeks, anytime I'm making salad dressing or I'm having a splash of apple cider vinegar in the morning just to get my digestive tract moving along, I have these nice mineral rich dense of the greens captured in that apple cider vinegar that I can pour out and incorporate into other aspects of my life, and then add more apple cider vinegar. Or let the greens, take the greens out and use them in the apple cider vinegar, and they're nice and tasty. So that's one way with the vinegar. With the root, you can either use it fresh in a really similar way, or you can have it dried. Dried, cut and sifted dandelion root by itself as a decoction, where I'm putting 1 teaspoon per cup into a pot, and I'm simmering that for about 20 minutes, and then straining with whatever method you want for straining. Any straining device will help you strain out that dandelion root from your tea blend. It makes a really lovely coffee substitute. If you really just like that bitter flavor, either in the morning or later in the day when you don't really want to incorporate the caffeine into your life, dandelion can be really nice, especially if it's a little bit roasted. Now, there are roasted coffee substitutes that use dandelion root in their ingredients. But remember, if it says roasted, it still has a wonderful bitter flavor, but it's not going to give you that same wonderful liver activity that you might be going for. Once it's roasted, a lot of the medicinal qualities have been taken away by the heat. So things like Dandy Blend, which is a powdered coffee substitute, it has some chicory in it as well, is lovely and a great way to avoid having caffeine, but you're not accessing a lot of the historical medicinal qualities of dandelion if it's been roasted. And if it's powdered and added to water, I also question some of the other ingredients, so keep that in mind as well. Dandelion root, not roasted, is really nice. You can add it to any chai tea blend. It's really nice, nutty, little bitter flavor, but if you mix it with things like ginger and cinnamon, it blends really nicely, and you could have a warm, slightly bitter and sweet beverage. You can add a little bit of hemp milk to it, and it can be really nice, especially if you live in a place where it gets a little bit colder, sitting by a fire. We're here in Central Florida. It's a chilly 82 degrees. I thought about putting a sweater on. I might just go make myself some chai instead with some dandelion root in that decoction. So, dandelion, the whole plant is edible. The flowers, the leaves, and the root. The leaves and the root have other medicinal qualities. The leaves are really high in nutrients. They both have some activity in supporting the body flushing or getting the blood moving up and cleansed throughout the body. We have several false dandelions that grow here in Central Florida and South Florida, but we're talking about the same dandelion that you probably have seen on the roadsides anywhere north of Gainesville, Florida. We're talking Pennsylvania and New Jersey and all the way up the East Coast and much of the rest of the United States. If you have questions, feel free to drop them below in the comments. Thank you for joining me in our backyard in this urban herbal oasis, and I look forward to seeing you next time.